seen on the film. So when you walk across here, people come out and that. The toilets are located out here and to the left. And if they're full, if you go around and it's the first right and they're down this corridor. So the toilets are there. Refreshments are available if you need a cup of tea or coffee in the machine near the door. And there'll be a little bit of time, hopefully at the end, for Q&A. Okay, so I'll say again, welcome, and I'll pass you over to our Chief Exec, Aaron Cummins, and I forgot your name there. So he's had an overview of the annual report for you.
So hello everyone, my name's Aaron Cummins, Chief Executive here at the Trust. I think this is my 10th year that I'm entering into now, being at the organisation as a board member and entering into my 7th year as the Chief Executive. And I'm going to start with a couple of thank yous. So first of all, I'm going to thank Paul, Nick, Olivia, Melissa for the time and effort that goes into setting up a day like this. You might think, well, it's a set of slides and a couple of bits of paper that, you know, me, Chris, might talk to for half an hour or so. But there's an awful lot of work that goes into the annual report, the annual accounts. There's an awful lot of work that goes into setting the stalls up and getting today set up. So thank you very much for that. I know sometimes it's a thankless task, but I'm sure colleagues will feedback after today, particularly the market stalls. It's always nice to go and chat to colleagues about the work that's going on. So thank you very much for setting that up. It's always odd at an annual members meeting that you're talking about we're going to talk about 2023, 2024 today, which started kind of 18, 19 months ago and finished at the end of March, and we're well into 24, 25. So it's always interesting to kind of pull out from the annual report, kind of just reminding yourself what the organisation's done, what colleagues have achieved, what we've still yet to achieve. So I always find it quite cathartic preparing for the annual members meeting because it's a good reflection, I think, of the work that's gone before. So my second thank yous, and hopefully they'll be reflected from your views of the annual report, are to our colleagues, both those that work directly for University Hospitals Morecambe Bay, but also across the wider Bay Area and our ICS across Lancashire and South Cumbria. You can see really clearly in the annual report lots and lots of evidence of continued good work, some real hard yards in terms of improvement that we're still taking forward, and some good examples of where we're working really well with partners. So a massive thank you to colleagues for their efforts through 23, 24 and into this year. You'll also recognise in that annual report some areas that we're still not doing too well at, and where we have to have that continued focus of improvement that's taken us up to this point. So I'm also equally cautious at the annual members meeting. Rightly, there's a reflection of some successes and what we've done well as an organisation, but equally there's some real clarity on areas that we haven't done before and where we need to keep that focus. And I'll draw out a couple of those, Chair, as a briefing forward. So some facts and figures for last year, 23-24. It was quite an important year for us. We were at the start of the year still kind of looking at SOF 4. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's the strategic oversight framework. It's the rating system, if you will, for NHS England and where they see organisations. And we were bottom of that scale at SOF 4, rightly on reflection with some of the reports we've had from the CQC in the previous year, particularly around governance, risk, assurance. And 23-24 was the year where we completed all of our work under that recovery support programme. I'm delighted that we achieved exit from SOF 4. We're now in SOF 3. We've now got a transition plan to SOF 2. So I can see lots of good and positive messages now and evidence base for that continued improvement as we come through those SOF ratings. It was also important because it was another year where we've tried to make good the damage that COVID did to our population, to our communities, particularly around urgent care access and particularly around the amount of time it's taking for members of our communities to access the care that we would want to provide them. So if I could just draw attention to a couple of figures. So for our urgent care attendances, the demand on our urgent care services, and when I say that, I mean places like our emergency departments or our urgent treatment centres, there was just over 137,000 attendances last year. It's over 20,000 more attendances than we'd seen pre-pandemic. So lots of demand, lots of increase in demand for urgent care. But at the same time, our teams do some real innovative practice, whether it's same day emergency care, additional urgent treatment centre capacity here, our frailty approach and fit approach. We managed to just fall short of the national target of 76%. But I'm pleased to say in 24-25, that continued improvement work means we are regularly now hitting the 78% national target as an organisation. I want to give a special kind of reflection back to colleagues at the Royal Lancaster Infirmary site, particularly the last 6 months. I think it's fair to say West London Furnace did very well last year on urgent care delivery. Our life fell short, but we understand why that is, and our teams have worked really hard the last 6 months to bring that performance up. So we're seeing that improvement continue into this year. From an outpatient and day case perspective, over 600,000, so 10,000 appointments per week around outpatients, whether that's a follow-up, 5,500 burns, and over 55,000 day case procedures. So the reason I say that is it's hard to get a sense of the scale of our organisation. We're sat in a lecture theatre rather than one of our hospital sites. But because we provide services to over 1/3 people, our teams are delivering huge scales of kind of clinical service support and clinical delivery every day, 24/7, 365. And particularly post-COVID, you can see as an organisation, waiting lists reducing, waiting times reducing. Our ambition at the end of this year is to have no patients waiting more than 52 weeks. That sits in our plans at the moment. That's a sea change. We were at 2-year waits only 2 years ago. So teams, again, working really hard to make those improvements. Particularly, again, a reflection for our surgical and critical care group, some of the investment we put into our theatres and diagnostic capacity, but they're also taking through some really innovative practice around how many cases in a session you can see in theatre. And I think some of the pilot work, Scott, at various points, we're seeing 4 or 5 cases on a session at the moment. So again, real innovation leading to faster access and improved outcomes for patients. Our staff survey results last year, I think we had just over 3,000 colleagues responded. It's about 42% response rate. We saw improvements across nearly all of the questions that are posed in the staff survey. Particular positive responses that we've seen play out again around the amount of staff we have available to do the work, the materials, the tools we have available to colleagues to deliver the care that they would like to deliver, and pleasingly increasing performance around support from line managers and managers on kind of making changes and service improvements. Also saw really good improvements in our what we call the WRES or WDES data. That's around race equality, disability equality standards. So we've seen real improvements where our quality diversity improvement works started to have an impact. We have, though, also seen areas where we need to improve. So having just said we just fell short of a target of 76% last year for urgent care delivery, but we're periodically achieving the national target this year of 78%. I still remember a time when it was a 95% target. I've just said that we've made massive inroads into reducing our waiting list, but there's still over 50,000 patients on our waiting list today. And whilst we'll reduce the waiting time from 2 years only a year or 2 ago to no more than a year, I remember when an 18-week breach was something to talk about, and still is actually when we see long waits, particularly from a quality perspective. I gave good feedback around our staff survey results, but even the improvements in race equality, our Black and ethnic minority colleagues are still more likely to find themselves in disciplinary procedures. We're still not seeing the response I'd like to see on raising concerns and being confident that the quality improvements that would follow would stick, and that we're still seeing issues around appraisals and the quality of appraisals. I think as an organisation, we've focused on hitting the numbers of appraisals rather than the quality of the appraisal. And I know Ali and the team with the care groups are working hard on improving both the quality and the coverage that we have around our appraisal. We've seen a response from the organisation, particularly around this. How do we make improvements stick? How do we change the culture of the organisation? How are we assured that the improvements we make lead to long-term results? And we've created a leadership development program. Nearly 3,000 colleagues have been through this now, around particular areas of focus around culture and leadership development. Average feedback's 9 out of 10 for those 3,000 colleagues that have been through that. And only this year we've launched what's a management development program, more the tools to do the job. And again, that's getting really good feedback from colleagues. So we're starting to put in place some building blocks to make sure that this is retained and continues to improve. So what does that mean then for the year we're in? So it's a year of continuous improvement. I've just highlighted 3 or 4 things that I can equally say the organisation's done really well at and made some real improvements. But on the same hand, there's still areas that we need to make material improvements in. So 24-25 is a year of continuous improvement. That will be us until we've reached the point where we know everything that we do is of the standard that we would want it to be, and it isn't there yet. So we will be making sure that we still connect with the National Maternity Improvement Programme and with the CQC and NHS England to move to the next rating of the soft criteria, to soft 2, to exit the maternity support programme. And we've got a meeting in November, myself and Tabitha with the team, to discuss that. We are looking forward to the new hospitals programme delivery phase for the business case. We're awaiting feedback now. You'll have seen the new government announce a pause and a review of the finances. I do want to point out, though, that last year we spent in excess of £31 million on capital, whether that was extending theatres capacity, our community and diagnostic centres, the new oncology unit, urology. There was an awful lot of clinical service capital investment on these sites. All of which are contributing to some of the clinical improvements that I've just articulated. And whilst we've got real pressures and we're trying to improve clinically and operationally, our teams also delivered just over £30 million of recurrent full year impact cost improvements last year, which is the largest savings target we've ever achieved. And whilst the pressure is on again this year, it's demonstrated that we can hit all 4 points of our dashboard: quality, safety, performance, colleague health and wellbeing, and our financial performance. And we need to keep that discipline through this year and beyond. We've got a couple of areas of priority this year, particularly around our clinical strategy, working with the local system and with the ICS, and we're expecting some conversations towards Christmas about what that might look like going forward. And we've also got a lot of focus at the moment on this year's financial position. I know Chris, as the Chief Finance Officer, will want to say a bit more about that in his presentation. So I hope that gives a summary of kind of last year, 23-24, some areas where I think our teams, our organisation's done really, really well, and some areas that we're going to have to continue to focus on to improve in the future. A couple of areas that I think is worth of note to talk about next year's AGM. So for 24-25, you'll see that in some of our reports, and hopefully I'll be standing here talking to you then about continuous improvement in those areas that I've just highlighted. But I just want to put on record, when I mention our trust, our partners, colleagues delivering the work, we cannot do it without the voluntary sector, without partners in our system, without the role of the governors and the non-exec directors. So I can't name check everyone, but there's far in excess of 10,000 people every year that go into the work that we present here in a 10-minute snapshot. But if you have the time and the opportunity, please read the annual report. Some good patient stories in there, some colleague reflections, some areas of improvement. So again, if you're playing a role with the governor, non-exec director, or you've got ambitions to play those roles, that will give you a good insight into some of the work that we're trying to take forward as an organisation. So I'm going to pause there, Chair, and I think I'm handing over to Chris Adcock, who's our Chief Financial Officer, who's going to do the annual accounts. I should just say Chris is on screen today, having tested positive for COVID. So Chris thought it was a good idea to do that with him, which I agree with this morning. Chris.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, thanks. Apologies, everybody, for that I'm unable to be there, but I'm sure you all think it's a good decision. Fortunately, thanks to the technology, though, I can still present the finance report for the year and also give some information about the year and the position going forward. So could we move forward one more, please? One more. Nicola? Yeah, thank you. So key messages from the year. So during the third quarter of the financial year, all organisations across Lancashire and South Cumbria were required to submit revised forecasts for their respective year-end financial positions. And these forecasts were then consolidated to present a system control total. So clearly, the year was a challenging one from a financial perspective. And the headlines on this slide really contain a balance of the ongoing nature of the challenge, as well as some of the positives that reflects the environment that we're operating within. So our revised the final year-end position, 13.9 million, obviously clearly adverse to our financial plan, but it was consistent with the overall achievement of a revised system consolidated forecast. So increasingly we're asked nowadays to not just look to our own position, but contribute to an overall position that's signed up to at a system level. As expenditure exceeded income in year, this has consequently resulted in a reduction in the trust's cash balances. Achieving the unqualified audit opinion in respect to the annual accounts is always a result of a significant effort and work both by auditors and finance staff in particular. And this was especially the case for the 23-24 financial year due to the additional challenge that resulted from the trust implementing an entirely new financial ledger in Q4 of the financial year. Our colleague from Grant Thornton, our external auditors, obviously will say more about this shortly. I should also add that the auditor has flagged ongoing challenges in the trust's arrangement to deliver value for money due to the scale of the ongoing financial improvement requirements. Again, I won't say any more at this point on that. In-year savings in excess of 27 million, as Aaron said in his brief, represented a very significant achievement, but more so because the recurrent value of those savings did, as Aaron said, exceed 30 million and represented just over 101% of the trust's target. So it's not just the scale of the savings here, it's the recurrent nature of savings, because this is how we move towards a more sustainable financial position in the future. If the savings were largely non-recurrent, that wouldn't be the case. And whilst demand for capital investments continues to materially exceed available resources, again, the capital programme was once again very significant, and I'll give a little bit more detail on that in a moment. Next slide, please, Nicola. Okay. You lost Nicola. There you are, thank you. So this is a statement of comprehensive income. It's otherwise known as the Trust's income and expenditure account, and it sets out in high-level detail the makeup of the final year-end position. Now, it's a little complicated because the Trust's financial performance is assessed as a position that is adjusted for a number of items, most materially the impact of impairment. Now, an impairment is a charge to the income and expenditure account, which reflects the revised valuations of the trust's estate, less the costs of any refurbishments. And it's different from costs that are attributed to the trust utilisation, its use of assets, and the extent to which their condition is therefore impacted by that usage. And the life of the asset consumed, which is a depreciation charge, and that is contained in the financial position. So it's just the impairments that are adjusted for. And they don't impact on cash. There's no actual payments to be made. Their impact is adjusted out of the financial statements for the purpose of assessing the trust financial performance, along with the smaller items relating to donated assets and the items from the stock take. Of items procured by NHS England. So that's all set out in the table at the bottom right of the screen, which provides a reconciliation from the formal statement in the INE to the reported year-end financial deficit of 13.9 million. Next slide, please, Nicola. Okay, so this is the statement of financial position, also better known as the trust balance sheet, and this accompanies the income and expenditure account and is specifically, whereas the INE account is for a full year, this is the position as reflected on the 31st of March 2024. And it shows that non-current asset values have increased, and this reflects the capital expenditure that's been deployed in year, then adjusted for deductions like depreciation and impairments from revaluation exercises. And current assets, things like the value of our stocks, they're called inventories here, and the value of income owed to the trust as at 31st of March 2024. under trade and other receivables, and the amount of cash in the bank. So the reduction in the value of the income owed to the trust reflects that these balances were recovered in year, which would have positively affected the trust cash balance. But a combination of the in-year overspend and the reduction in the amounts due for payment by the trust all contributed to the in-year reduction in the trust cash balance, which is reflected in the balance sheet. Slide 7. Next slide, please, Nicola. Okay, so this slide sets out how the trust capital resources were allocated across the various schemes making up the capital programme and significant ongoing investment in a number of major schemes across the trust. Now, significant investments were made, as you'll be able to see from this, at the Royal Lancaster Infirmary site and Westmoreland General in Kendal. But I just want to highlight the trust-wide schemes did include £1.9 million worth of investment into the Furness General site across the backup maintenance and medical equipment lines, as well as IT, actually digital investments that went into that site. The 24-25 plan includes a £7 million investment in Furness General Hospital, including the Community Diagnostic Centre development, which is ongoing. Next slide, please. So this really just highlights the points that I've already covered. So I won't dwell on this slide, if that's okay. Can we go to the Outlook slide? Okay, so 24-25 is a massively challenging year financially for the Trust, for the ICE Integrated Care Board, the Integrated Care System and the North West region, even the NHS in general. And such is the challenge that despite savings requirements of between 6.6 and 8.9% for the acute and community providers across Lancashire and South Cumbria, the Integrated Care System has a combined deficit plan of 175 million. The Morecambe Bay, the University Hospital and Morecambe Bay deficit plan within that is set at 21.9 million. Now, the challenges we are facing are not unique to Morecambe Bay, and more than ever, it is clear that there is benefit to be had from working more closely with our partners across the system to establish truly sustainable arrangements for the future. We're seeing the value of our approach in this regard, in particular in relation to work done across the South Cumbria place, and we hope to extend this across all areas. We continue to promote closer integration across the Provider Collaborative Board and to be an active partner with our Integrated Care System colleagues in respect of the wider recovery and transformation agenda. The One LSC agenda, which is referenced here, this will see providers across Lancashire and South Cumbria bringing together support service teams and corporate functions. And whilst that's evidence of the commitment to closer integrated working between system partners, it also is relevant to show the challenges that we face in making these changes whilst we're pursuing significant levels of financial improvement and ensuring that we bring our teams with us and manage their concerns and anxieties as we go through those processes. There is a significant pressure on the pay bill, and again, this is a factor that is not unique to Morecambe Bay. Around 70% of all costs are generally pay related in the NHS, and the increased staff costs incurred through the pandemic isn't sustainable going forward. We did operate a mutually agreed resignation scheme, a MARS scheme, towards the end of the last financial year, and we've also got enhanced vacancy and recruitment controls in place consistent with those of our wider system partners. Now, the Lancashire and South Cumbria system is one of 9 systems nationally to be identified to be part of the National Investigation and Intervention process. And we've reported on this in more detail through board meetings and other routes. Through this process, we have reviewed and updated our arrangements for financial grip and control and the delivery of financial improvements that are required to achieve the financial plan. These have now been subject to independent scrutiny, and whilst largely this confirmed that the Trust has strong arrangements in place, there are a number of areas where we need to progress things more quickly to ensure that we're able to manage the expenditure run rate trends down to a more sustainable level. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. I think it's relevant, given that we've just gone through the first year of our finance strategy, just to highlight how our ongoing approach remains consistent with this. So our approach to the challenges we're facing remains consistent with the strategy. For example, discipline. We must be strong on the basics of financial control, and consistently so, and ensure that those who commit resources understand the principles and purposes of our policies and procedures and are supported to do so. Our focus on service line reporting, combined with the business intelligence basis underpinning our financial sustainability plan, are two examples of the way we're working to ensure that our approach and prioritisation is driven by data, and as well as the insights and experience of our colleagues across the Trust. The Trust also has established a transformation and improvement programme this year, which is our vehicle for ensuring our clinical configuration and continuous improvement strategies are aligned and progressed consistent with the strategic priorities for the Trust. We continue our drive to achieve extended financial improvement targets, which will enable the Trust to engage with system partners more effectively in seeking finally a resolution to the long-standing and recognised structural deficit that we've reported in previous years. We've made much progress on assuring that we have a financially enabled workforce over recent years, recognised by the Trust's Level 2 towards excellence accreditation. We must maintain this through the One LSC agenda and work to realise the benefits that we identified in setting the vision for this programme of work. Our success in managing these challenges is central to our ability to protect the public purse as articulated in the strategy. And we will continue our work with system partners to establish a new financial framework which will underpin our income contracts going forward. And we will look to bring in the insight from the development and delivery of our health inequalities action plan to support this work. Okay, that's all of my slides. Thank you. Am I handing back to Mike?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to move us on, colleagues, then to the Trust External Auditors. Matt, Derek, you're going to present the report. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, I'm Matt Derrick. I'm from the audit manager, from Grant Thornton, the Trust External Auditor. Just explain the responsibilities as the appointed auditor for the Trust. Under the NAO's Code of Practice, we have two main responsibilities, which is to give an opinion on the financial statements, and then also to report on your value for money arrangements at the Trust, which I'll explain a bit more about. So, in terms of the financial audit, we always set a materiality level. Materiality is a threshold at which we consider any misstatement in the financial statements or an omission will be fundamental to the user's understanding of those financial statements. For 23-24, we set that at £8 million, which is equivalent to 1.4% of the gross operating expenditure for the year. We also, in some instances, set a lower materiality for certain areas of the account. So, for instance, the senior officer remuneration disclosures, clearly £8 million would not be relevant materiality for those disclosures. And because of the sensitivity of those, we set a lower threshold for reporting errors, which is at £5,000. In terms of the risks we identified in the audit for this year, under the auditing standards, there is always an assumed risk of management override of controls, which requires us to be professionally sceptical of management in terms of considering whether there's any bias in estimates or whether transactions have been recorded and presented in the accounts. And pleased to say we did not identify any issues to report in that area. We do a lot of focus testing on manual adjustments to the general ledger, which supports the financial statements, and no issues to report there. And we had a particular focus on the Trust implementation of a new ledger, as Chris mentioned earlier as well in his presentation. Valuation of land and buildings is an area of significant estimation in the Trust's financial statements. And we look at the key assumptions and the key input data that goes into producing those estimates each year. And then also under the auditing standards, we're required to consider the risk that revenue and expenditure has been improperly recognised in the year. And again, pleased to say that we did not identify any issues to report from this year's audit. So in terms of the overall conclusion, we issued an unqualified opinion on the Trust's financial statements on the 27th of June, which is in line with the statutory deadline. An unqualified opinion is a clean opinion, which required no modification. And we're also required to, in that opinion, it is our opinion that the trust's financial statements give a true and fair view of the financial position and the income and expenditure transactions in the year, and that those financial statements have been prepared in accordance with the financial reporting framework set by the Department of Health. We did identify a few minor issues in the financial statements, but no significant issues requiring amendment. And that is testament to the good quality set of accounts that were provided with for audit by the finance team. We did make a couple of recommendations in relation to contracts being in place, signed contracts, this is for the patient care income, and noting that the trust should work with partners in the ICS to make sure those contracts are fully signed and in place. And also in relation to the approach for valuing surplus property assets that the trust holds, and those recommendations have been accepted by management. We are also required to consider other areas of the financial statements in the annual report, and specifically the remuneration and staff report and governance statement. And here we're considering whether those parts of the document are complete and accurate and consistent with the findings of our general audit work. And again, no issues to report in those areas. We do have the options to use additional auditor powers, make referrals to the regulatory body, or produce reports in the public interest. And again, pleased to say that we've not deemed it necessary to use those powers for 2024. So under the NA audit code, we're also required to report on the trust arrangements with value for money, specifically considering 3 areas: financial sustainability, governance, and arrangements for improving economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. For 23-24, we did identify one significant weakness in the trust financial arrangements for sustaining financial sustainability, and that's in relation to the significant SIP programme and the challenging target to achieve that for 24-25. And at the time of our review, the trust had a significant portion of those savings to still identify. And this is not an uncommon recommendation that we raise across our NHS trust clients, given this challenging financial situation in the sector at the moment. And we recognise the work that the trust is doing to improve that. And we'll also work with the trust in the forthcoming year to understand what mitigation has been put in place and the progress with that. We did also identify some areas for improvement. These are not areas where we consider there are any deficiencies in the trust arrangements, but merely areas where we see scope for further improvement in line with best practice, drawing upon the insights we have from the audits across the sector. Thank you. Question?
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll take questions at the end. That's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll move us on. Thanks, Matt. And take us to Susie Hayman, our lead governor, for your update today.
Thank you. Good update, that photograph. I was actually appointed as lead governor only 2 months ago. So in fact, I haven't been the lead governor during the period that we're considering, 22-24. The posts were then held by Lorraine Crossan-Close and Shirley Ann Wilson, who I think is on holiday in Scotland at the moment. Anyway, not here. I must say I'm very pleased to have noticed that we had quite a few governors in this audience, but Chris seems to have frightened 3 of them away. Where'd you go, Chris? We've got governors who are past governors who are about to leave. We've got governors who are continuing, and we've got one new governor who's about to join us here. Very nice. Right, overview of 23-24. The Council of Governors received and considered reports on quite a number of issues, including the operational plan, the annual report and accounts, the external audit report and accounts, and the budget and financial information. Governors were also involved in attending a wide range of meetings, subgroup, professional groups, hospital meetings, all sorts of things. If I read the whole list, it would send you all to sleep. I'm not going to do so. Just a snapshot is we did various board meetings and subgroups, Council of Governors division development sessions, membership database procurement. That was quite interesting. The appointment of non-executive directors and associate non-executive directors, which is one of the roles of the Council of Governors. And Mike, who had been one of our councillors, actually benefited from that and became an associate NED. We did walkabouts and CRAS visits, quality assurance visits, quite a lot of those, which I think are incredibly important, but particularly non-NHS members of the council to actually go close up and see exactly what's happening on our wards and how it works. We did briefings on the ICS, the ICP, and the ICC proposals. That is integrated care systems, the integrated care provider, and the integrated care communities. And you see me very carefully saying that because not being an NHS person, I really do struggle with all these strings. I have to keep looking at the glossary to see what I will mean. We also did the patient experience group. I've got the list if anybody is interested. Very happy to read it to if you want. We were also involved in June 23. 2 governors were suspended from the Council of Governors, pending an independent external investigation. The investigation report was shared with the Council in May 24, and based on the findings, the Council of Governors voted to remove 2 of our governors. A look ahead to the future. Now, the whole point about governors, what we do is we function as the voice of the community. We are the voice of the people who we're the users of our service, both acute and community. We are the voice of anybody really in our constituency, including obviously people who work for us as well. And the views are basically fed to the council and then fed to the board through the lead governor, who's a conduit both ways. So in other words, the idea is to give the board what we're hearing, to get back to the council what I'm hearing from the board. We're able to be advocates for the public and patients and to support the connection between the trust and its community. I mentioned the development programme, which is a really important system we're now having to support council of governors in doing their job. We work with the council, colleagues and the public to support the trust in, it's a lovely phrase here we use, which is the vision is to create a great place to be cared for and a great place to work. And I think that's absolutely true of what we're doing. In the 2 years, Aaron has already mentioned, in the 2 years which I've been governor, we've gone from SOF 4 to SOF 3. And I think that was a real effort of work by our 8,000 colleagues. We really worked incredibly hard to do that. And we are seeing the probability that we're going up to SOF 2 soon, which in the near future, which will be really good. And as I said, a real achievement. And finally, on behalf of the council, what I'd like to do is to thank Lorraine Crossan-Coates, who was our lead governor, who is leaving the council at the end of this month, and Jim Wood, who's also been a councillor for one of the members of the governors for a long time. But I'm glad to say you're not escaping, are you? No. You're staying as a volunteer. Indeed. We need volunteers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Susie. We're moving on then to the item on the agenda now for questions and answers. I'd just like to read a question that we've had previous to the AM that was forwarded to us. This is a question on whole body dermatology checks. It's a question from one of our constituents at Bolton Le Sands. And the question is the trust able to fund whole body dermatology checks for patients concerned about their skin and cancer? I've been for specific lumps and had some removed, but I've many others I can't see on my trunk and back. Having spoken to lots of friends our age, they all would welcome such a service. Single people in particular don't have anyone to check their backs. It would save individual visits to GPs and referrals on. Also, information about remaining types of lumps and growths could be explained. Elderly people would value this. The skin programs on TV are fascinating and factually good. I know money is tight. Patients might be happy, though, to pay towards the cost.
Jane, our Chief Medical Officer, is round for a response to this one.
Jane, please.
Okay. So it's a short answer is no. The more considerations we do have a back in service, and as with the dermatological guidance, it's for those who are known to be at some kind of risk by another condition, previous melanoma, various family history, etc., or lots of roles, and people are referred into dermatology for that, and that would then be picked up. But it's those high risk conditions. There isn't actually good evidence that it is good as a population screening tool. That is largely why it's not something that we are required or even encouraged to do. We've seen massive numbers of dermatology referrals. In the last 5 years, we've gone up from 8,750 to over 11,000 barrels a year, so over 20% increase. And so our demand far outstrips the capacity now. So we've got a huge amount of work ongoing to develop the service, to improve, to maintain performance. But at the time, it isn't something that we're planning to develop. There are private providers out there who do offer the service, not only within private hospitals, but on high streets and routes and Specsavers to kind of look those things. What I would say is that artificial intelligence might give us a different answer in the future, because I can well envisage that actually having photographs taken and having them taken a year or two later, and there's an artificial intelligence tool that can map the differences, I think what might prove a different thing. But at this present time, it's essentially that it is proven as a screening tool for the general population. So reserve it for those who have lives.
Thank you. And if I could just ask the company secretary's office if they could capture that response, Jane, and then reply to our constituents to that. Thank you. So I'll open it up. Questions from the floor, colleagues? Mr. Wilton?
Thank you very much, Mike. Susie, I'd like to ask you a question, really. So for the people in this room, I and my colleague next to me are two governors who were suspended and then dismissed from this trust. I've seen Aaron come in 10 years ago, and we've worked hard in this trust. So on the 1st of May 2024, at a special Council of Governors meeting, how could you make a collective decision on the removal of Governors Wilton and Butler without seeing all the evidence? And you said you got the whole report. You did not get all the report. You were not allowed the rebuttal information in Appendix C, one of which, for your information, was your approval to me to use your private email address. And I was accused of using people's private. You and many other governors have you, and that's in Appendix C. And there's a lot of other information in there, Aaron. There's wrong information, there is inaccurate information, and we're going to take this further, Aaron, because what's gone on here is totally unacceptable. And I really worry about the culture of the trust. You and I and the rest of us are being through a lot of different things. It's about culture. You talk in the trust about people being able to speak up in that, but they won't speak up, even if the governors won't even allow the other person's viewpoint to be heard. Our side of it wasn't heard. But it was in the report, Aaron.
Yeah, okay, that's confusing us slightly, because so I'm going to direct both questions to Susie and then to Aaron. Susie?
Okay, factual. I gave you permission to use my personal email before I got my trust.
I think that's the case, but
Yes, it was. It was when we were corresponding before I went on the trust. So that was fine.
Yeah.
Yes, email me privately before, but once it was trust, I don't quite see why there's an issue about that, because that was before I had.
well, there are a number of other governors who I've got a similar thing, and I've had correspondence with you well after this date on your private email address.
Yeah,
But one of the issues, Aaron,
So I think so just to be clear for colleagues, the issue of governors and the governance around governors, it's a non-executive function. So the chief executive's office, the executive don't have oversight of that particular process. But obviously the chief executive, I have to have briefings in my role as to how this is impacting on the organisation, what the process that's being followed. So in terms of due process, this is a piece of work that was supported in the commissioning with NHS England. It had some oversight from the regional bodies. So as a chief executive, I'm aware that there was lots of oversight of how this was commissioned, developed, the reports produced, and then shared with colleagues to make a decision. So I was satisfied through that assurance through NHS England and others that that was the process that was followed. I appreciate if you're not satisfied with the process through that route, then there are rights of recourse and others. And I'm aware you just said you want to take that further. I understand that. So whatever that is, if there's a further engagement for the trust to do, then we would obviously respond to that process. But again, it would come through the chair's office, or actually in the case where the chair, there was anything implicating the chair with any allegations, it would come through the senior independent director's office. Just to be clear on the process.
And just to add to that, the process, the constitutional process has been completed. So Obviously, you're free to take any other action. Please feel able to do so, but the trust has completed its process.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much.
George?
Can I just say that in relationship to the process that took place and the evidence that we were encouraged to attend the meeting with Ibex Gale to give evidence, and we spent 2 long meetings and 2 long months gathering evidence to provide to Ibex Gale, which the rebuttal evidence, which is in Appendix C, and the governors have been denied access to it. How can you make a decision on the basis of not seeing all of the evidence? The other thing that concerns us is that the governors that complained about our behaviour were included in the vote in the decision whether to remove us, and that's completely wrong. The complainants can't be involved in a vote when the defendants are not allowed to.
We're not going to go through the investigation here, but the colleagues who are not involved, Ibex Gale were an external private investigative company that was hired to look into the complaints. There were 24 complaints, many from fellow governors. The Constitution was followed, George. People are entitled to vote. Despite that, we don't have anything in our Constitution that says complainants can't then not vote. So, and also the amount of complaints, sorry to say, would have meant we wouldn't have had a quorum council of governors if that was the case. Anything you would just say?
Purely to say that we aren't investigators. An external, professional, objective organisation did the investigation and gave us their report. We looked at the report. That seems to be totally misleading to me.
You didn't see the report.
I saw the report of the investigation.
Have you seen Appendix C? Have you been in the Appendix C?
I said we're not investigators. The
No,
investigation
that's
was
the
done.
report.
The investigation was done by Ibex, and we voted on that.
I'm going to close this one down, colleagues, because I know this is an annual members meeting. Other members here may ask other questions. I don't want a contradictory yes and no that gets us nowhere really. Yes, please.
I'm Sasha, I'm the interim public governor, so thank you for the warm welcome as well. Thank you for also explaining some of the happenings because they are very, very useful. Now hopefully will be one that needs last week. Just a quick question really, it's the first time that I've had the annual report, so excuse me for some ignorance there. In terms of the impairment, it was quite significant, 12.5 million. I see that's an exceptional charge. Can I ask what triggered that? And have I understood correctly that 12.5 million has offset the 36.5 million investment that we've had, which is why the non-current assets hasn't increased as much? It's because of that huge impairment. Just interested to know what that figure was. Was it about investment? Is it outdated technology? Just interested to know what that might be.
So, very welcome. Despite my background as a CFO, I am going to hand over to my CFO for that. Appreciate your academic background in this area, so I'm going to. I'll hand over to Chris. Chris, can you just articulate a response to that question, please?
I couldn't quite hear the question. Would you, saying what it was?
It's an explanation of the impairment that's reflected in the 23-24 accounts.
Oh yeah, so the impairment, it is a significant number of transactions goes into calculating the impairment, or as we mentioned, and I think Matt mentioned as well, we did a big multi-site revaluation process. The impairment is the change in the valuation of the estate less the cost of refurbishment of the estate. So what's happened, of course, is that in some instances we've refurbished things and the value of the estate has decreased by more than the value of the refurbishment, and that creates the negative entry that constitutes the impairment. So it's not one single item; it's a whole series of calculations and adjustments, and is done based on the at the very end of the financial year once we have the valuation.
Matt might come in as well, just as the auditor to give a view.
Yeah, absolutely. So following from what Chris said there are some key things to emphasise that are largely outside of the trust control, which do drive the estimated value of property. A lot of it's based on kind of market factors, so build costs, for instance, and like investor appetite determines the economic yield that value is applied to property valuations, and that can fluctuate quite significantly. It has done over the past few years because of the change in the economic situation.
Appreciate that.
You are going to be a very welcome asset.
No pun intended.
Everybody else in the room will be asked to explain the complexity behind that question. Okay. Colleagues, any further questions from the floor or comments?
I'd just like to ask Matt really a couple of things, and I'm glad our finance. It says on page 126, 26th of June 24, we identified a significant weakness in the trust arrangements for financial stability in this in relation to the scale, maturity, and deliverability of the 24-25 saving plans and associated risks. And we've had this over the last 10 years. We've, when you were finance director, we always struggled, but we never struggled this early. And I'm quite worried about the fact that our friends at the accounts have identified this so early. We're only in September, and in fact, they wrote this in June.
So David,
And that's worrying.
it's a standard report. We've had that, I think, in the last 2 or 3 annual reports. But what that's essentially saying is, given the scale of the challenge, ideally you'd want every part of your savings program identified before the year started, 1st of April. Now, given the complexity of the planning guidance and understanding what the actual targets are for the organisation, often it can be later in the year before we actually know what the target savings opportunity is for the trust. So whilst colleagues work really hard to build all the opportunities, actually every week, every month, every year, it's not necessarily just as part of the planning process. At various points in the year, you'll have scale unidentified. So you might have opportunities for, I don't know, waiting list initiative reductions or premium expenditure reductions for pay like bank and agency. But the work that you need to do to get those savings to the point where you know how and when they're going to be reduced might rely on estates investment for theatres expansion or a transformation programme to be delivered. Now, we take a view that until those things are absolutely nailed on, we don't sign them off. So as the year iterates, this cost improvement programme gets stronger and stronger as we get more clarity on what I call the what, by, when, and how the cost comes out. So it's not unusual in the cycle of NHS financial planning. That said, we're making good inroads into recurrent cost improvements, but we've still got a deficit plan this year in excess of £20 million. Now, pre-COVID, we were looking at underlying deficit position closer to that 60 to 80 million. So you can see how the organisation's making inroads to its underlying position. But Chris had a slide about our financial strategy going forward. Our ambition is over the next 2 or 3 years is to deal with that 20 million. Now, I don't know what funding arrangements for the NHS might be over the next 2 or 3 years, but we would hope there's some support for the kind of work we want to take forward with that productivity, efficiency investment programme. So we'd hope to strengthen that each year. So yeah, it's a fairly standard reflection on, I guess, the scale of the savings that have been signed off before the start of the year.
Thank you.
With the BAE vacuum cleaner sucking in labour from local employers, well, that's teachers, I guess, nursing, and another one. Is it creating a problem at Furness General in labour yet? Are we losing significant numbers? Because I know that other organisations are.
Yeah. Nothing that's flagged as a particular risk, but I talk to colleagues all the time, including last week. I was talking to one of our porter colleagues that's chosen to take a shift pattern and a level of income that we can't match to go over there. So we do see circumstances where colleagues in an active market in that area choose to work BAE and other suppliers, but nothing that's at the scale that would cause us any concerns around disruption. I know we have some really good links with BAE and other partners for shared recruitment, for things like the DFN project search. So there's still some really good partner relationships in that area of the world, but we are conscious that in lots of industries, including
it's hit teaching quite badly in the area. So I do know of several nurses.
You've got Ali Bolson, who's our Chief People Officer. Ali, is that an accurate reflection, do you think?
there is a constant kind of level of turnover and from British Aerospace, particularly in the Barrow area. I think Aaron's point about how impactful that is in terms of sustainability of services is the important one. We would expect some turnover. We've seen that, and there are some particular hotspots, I think, where we are seeing some real pulls from British Aerospace where that we're not able to compete with from a kind of remuneration perspective. But it's nothing that's causing us a particular sustainability issue.
Hey, colleagues, further questions? Maybe?
I just wondered, please, just Matt again, in your table of costs on page 182, talk about other costs of 4.3 million. And I wondered if it's possible to break that down a bit. It seems a rather big number to be lurking in it's on page 182, which is your big cost reconciliation. So
What are you referring to?
on the street here, so we've got that handy.
I think that's the accounts, isn't it? I think that's for Chris too.
Chris, have we got a view of what the breakdown or what typically would find itself in other expenditure in those tables that David's referring to?
No, I can't itemise it now, but we can provide that information. It is in the detail of the accounts. We need to, so I don't have it to hand down.
See, we pay the NHS resolution. It's gone up to £11.5 million. Is that sort of how do they base the costs of what they charge us? Is it what we've used or?
So I think with the breakdown of cost for 4.3, they will get that circulated. NHS resolutions, it's largely, it's like an insurance premium.
Yes.
So it's based on a number of factors, how they view risks, the kind of services you deliver across what area, patterns of previous claims, very similar to your insurance.
Yeah.
So in particular, we had a very high NHS resolutions bill, particularly around some of the maternity safety issues that we faced in the past, and we still see high premiums in that area. I guess the ambition now is through the continuous improvement work, quality safety work, the maternity improvement work, is that premium will come down. But I'm conscious that it's a high bill for most of the NHS at the moment. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Colleagues? On that basis then, please.
I'm a member of the public and I'm afraid a lot of that has gone over my head. I thought I might have to wait around a bit today, and so I brought with me Charles Dickens' Hard Times, which I thought might be appropriate to read when I see these financial statements. Now, I'm a retired doctor, and I've seen classically a lot of friction over the years between management and staff. It seems to me, and I've written to Dr. Thomas about this before, but he declined to answer my questions and got his secretary to say he wasn't going to answer them. But I want to know why there is this reluctance throughout the NHS for senior management to take clinicians and people who know what they're talking about, to take them seriously and think they know better, with disastrous financial consequences. I'm particularly mystified, as a lot of other people are who read the Westmoreland Gazette. I took an interest in this when I saw that the two governors had been suspended. And it's not just two, there was another very, very experienced lady who before that had also been relieved of her duties as a governor. I think she may be here today. I can't really understand how this is allowed to go on. I mean, if people listened to clinicians, instead of just hearing in the paper that two governors had been suspended, there were two reasons given for this. The first was that they'd dared to ask questions, which presumably the trust management didn't like. And the answer to that from the Mr. Thomas was that no, there'd been multiple complaints about them. Now, we've heard nothing more to resolve this issue as to why these governors were suspended. But I and many other people I've spoken to have an extremely strong suspicion that the timing is very close to the extremely unfortunate affair of Mr. Peter Duffy being dismissed and illegally, constructively dismissed, as proved by his tribunal that he went to. And we think that the governors, very rightly, senior governors, well-respected governors, asked questions about this, and the board didn't like it. So they decided to victimize these governors. Now, I cannot see how there can be any fairness. I think all the other governors should have had a chance to discuss this and the questions that are asked, and rightly asked, about Mr. Duffy's dismissal. He's written 2 extremely disturbing books about the way he's been treated by this trust. It makes me feel quite sick to think that this can go on in the NHS. And I think that the governors should be allowed privacy to discuss their concerns without being watched over by the chairman of the trust board, Dr. Thomas. And I understand that throughout the organisation, throughout the country, it is a requirement that seems quite mad that the trust chairman is also required to be the chairman of the governors. Now, how can the governors feel at liberty to discuss sensitive matters if there's a hawk sitting there who is likely to suspend them if they ask questions that aren't popular? Now, I think there's a very large appetite, and but not before time. I hope to God that Wes Streeting does do this root and branch reform. And I think that senior management have got to take a very, very close look at the way they disregard the advice of senior people who know what they're talking about and are making protected disclosures, or what are meant to be protected disclosures, but they are rather dismissed as whistleblowers and persecuted and detrimented as such for that illegally under employment law. Now, the trouble is that most of these people who are victimized in this way haven't the money to go to law to contest it. It was only because Mr. Duffy had the guts and he was willing to take the risk that he went to law and got a bit of justice. But for ordinary people, they get issued with non-disclosure agreements by the trust, NDAs, which the government has urged the trust to stop issuing, i.e., if you shut up, we'll pay your legal costs. But if you don't, you'll be liable for all of them. And so, of course, they can't afford to go to law and risk their houses and everything over legal costs. So, really, the trust is able to do exactly what it likes in a very cavalier fashion. And I think that is largely responsible for the sort of bills that have been run up with legal companies and advisory companies and management consultants, external ones. Some of these lawyers are charging £500 an hour, plus VAT. Now, what sort of bloody hole is that making in NHS resolutions provision? I understand that NHS resolution have made provision. They made provision last year for over £100 billion for potential claims if they had to be settled by a particular date. I think it was only much less than that, but there's a provision made, and they boasted that that's been reduced to 60 billion this year. Now, I've said all I want to say, but I'm very dissatisfied, and I still want to know the exact reasons why these 2 governors were suspended. Please.
Okay, thank you. The reason I haven't responded to you is because I think we should meet to have a cup of tea, because genuinely I get confused between many of your statements, which seem to be opinion, and what you're asking as questions. Some of the questions you ask are really genuinely out of my sphere of authority or control. I can't control the national guidelines on the way that chair governors as well as the board. I would be happy if it was split. I have no issues with that. And some of the questions you ask are still engaged in legal proceedings, so I'm not allowed and I'm loath to say anything because they're still live. But there are a few things I can say. I do not have the power or the authority to dismiss governors. That's not in our constitution. I do not have that as the chair, so I have not dismissed or expelled any governor. That is the Council of Governors' power. They are a self-governing group of 22 people. They made the complaint. I then asked for it to be investigated. Your issue about internal and external, if we have an internal investigation, quite rightly, people will say, well, as you have said or alluded, well, are they hiding things? Is it themselves looking at themselves? So we often get externals in to give that degree of transparency and independence. And that's one of the reasons why we do that. There has been an independent external company that looked at the behaviour of the governors. They produced a report based on their findings, which was given to the council, and the council themselves made the decision. Now, last thing I want to say on this, our constitution says that our council has to reach a threshold of 75% of members that have to agree to a vote. Many other councils have 50% would be enough, or a simple majority. But in ours, it was 75% of the council have to agree to vote, and that's what they did. I don't have the authority to override that, neither do I as a single voter have any sway or influence over that. I hope that gives you some reassurance that the process was followed legally and constitutionally.
No,
And I don't have the authority to do
I
that.
still want to know. It's a simple question, and I cannot get an answer. What were these questions, these unpalatable questions that these experienced governors were asking?
I'm happy, on advice from the company secretary, after this meeting, you got full disclosure of the report. You can read it yourself. There's nothing to hide in it.
What's to that question?
I've no confidence in the system of management of any of these NHS trusts. Many of these things would never have happened. This Lucy Letby thing is a fiasco with the management. There's been Birmingham with Jackie Smith, the ex-Home Secretary, who was involved in the parliamentary scandal. She got made chief executive of the Birmingham Group of Hospitals. I don't know who these people are who come up to be trust managers. They're obviously not up to the job. And it's about time that the Clark report recommendations were listened to and adopted about the suitability of people to become senior NHS managers without them going at liberty, throwing buckets of public money to lawyers and management companies, external niche marketing and all these other quangos. They don't, if the trust knew what they were doing, they wouldn't need to bring in these so-called experts at £500 an hour. This is where the money's going, down the drain, with legal expenses in the health service and incompetent people who don't know what they're doing at senior level. I'm not saying everybody, but there's a large majority of people who need to take a very close look in the mirror.
And many of the things you say, I can't comment on. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to come to the end of the meeting now. But I will speak to you outside of the meeting with the company secretary, so you can have sight of the report if you wish. Okay, colleagues, if that's okay, I'm going to move us on to just the closing remarks. It's been a busy year. We're into a more difficult and more challenging year. We've got, I think, quite rightly in the annual members meeting, the opportunity to formally thank our colleagues, particularly all the staff that we've got in the trust, for everything that they've done, every site and the community. A lot of people don't realise that a third of the trust delivers in community with 42 community sites. And we must pass some thanks to those, as well as every site that we have, from Westmoreland to Barrow to RLI and others. I'd like to formally thank the board for the way that they have managed a very, very difficult year and continue to manage an even more challenging year this year, and to thank those non-executive directors that have left and have served their period of office, and to welcome the incoming directors. I'd like to also give my formal thanks to Lorraine Crossley-Close, who did a fantastic job as the lead governor through a very challenging period, and also to Shirley Ann Wilson, who is also outgoing now, and obviously to welcome Susie and Jane Kenny as our new lead governor and our deputy lead governor. And to thank all the governors that are leaving this year, we really, really appreciate it. And one of the governors will be staying as a volunteer, Jim, I've always thanked you. And another governor, long-standing again, becomes a new non-executive director, Mike Wilson. Welcome. Matt, thank you to Grant Thornton for doing what you're doing it very well and giving us that degree of independence. And thanks to the officers today, to Chris Adcock, to Aaron as chief exec, and to Susie. I'd just like to end to say, we've got a new government now, but I think the Labour government said before they were in power that for this year at least, they would hang on to the Treasury planning that the previous government had instigated. And I think as we go into our winter pressures, it is going to be an extremely challenging year. But we'll deal with it as we always do. Staff are just fantastic. We will continue to drive forward on the continuous improvement. We will get to SOC 2. We will make patient experience better. And I'd like to formally thank, as we work towards that, our ICB partners, our PCP collaborators, and also the local authorities, social care, third sector, the faith sector, and in particular the volunteers that we have. Colleagues, thank you for attending the annual members meeting. I'll close it at 4:44. Thank you.